If you don't express your emotions, you're denying your humanness and denying your chance to evolve spiritually and in your healing journey. And in this video, I'm going to dive into why people bypass and how you can begin to take ownership of your emotions. So let's dive in. So in this new age spiritual community, there's this kind of new trend or new way of thinking of being positive only, positive vibes only, and it's kind of not toxic positivity. You could say it's toxic positivity, but I think it's where this whole love and light phenomenon comes from. It's that if we are experiencing high vibrational emotions, we're positive all the time. This means we are in a high vibrational frequency, we're high vibe, and that means we're really spiritual. And this is still spiritual ego when you're attached to the fact that, yeah, I'm all high vibe, I'm all positive because I get to experience happy and joy all the time. And often what people don't realize is unconsciously their subconscious and their body is still giving off a frequency and thoughts that are more heavier and dense, quote unquote, negative emotions. So sometimes people think, oh, I'm going to have a positive thought that creates a positive emotion, but don't understand the belief deep inner work that of some negative or limiting beliefs that they're still holding on to, that's vibrating at a lower state of consciousness at a low frequency. So what this means is if a person is giving off a frequency that is coming from limitation, coming from scarcity, anger, any kind of heavier dense emotion, it's going to attract scenarios or situations in their life that reflects that. So the reason why people do a lot of spiritual bypassing is because they believe they may manifest negative things, or it's attached to the ego. And obviously the ego, when you're on your spiritual path, is something to be integrated, something to kind of be tamed and to work with, because the ego is not your friend, but it's not your enemy. And most spiritual communities and traditional spirituality think of the ego as this thing that is bad, you've got to get rid of. And yes, there are things that drive our ego desires, and the reason why we have negative emotions is due to attachments that the ego's formed. But we have to work with the ego and love those parts of ourselves. So with the ego, people associate that as something bad, something low vibe, something that's associated with negative emotions. So what they do is they bypass that, they go around that in order to just experience the higher states of consciousness. And what does bypassing actually look like? It means you've not integrated parts of yourself, you're refusing still to accept parts of yourself, accept certain emotions, and certain emotions might be invoked by these aspects of yourself. But also what it looks like, spiritual bypassing, is being totally just completely focused only on practices that will raise your vibration, ascend you into altered states of consciousness, higher states of consciousness. No, continuously doing meditation without doing the integration work of the lower vibrational emotions. And so this means you are denying yourself the chance to actually be human as well, because all emotions are valid, all emotions are human, and we get to come here in this time to experience what it's like to be a human. So you are denying yourself that chance to express your emotions. And so when we are suppressing emotions, we choose not to feel and just bypass and do constant like yogas, meditation, things to just put us in a high vibrational state. We are denying ourselves the chance to fully heal, fully integrate. And so we get attached to this altered state. We feel like, well, if I get to a high vibrational state, then I won't have to feel any negative emotions anymore. But we have to understand that it's about taking ownership of your emotions on this spiritual path and the healing path too. It's about how to work with your ego triggers, because it's the ego that gets triggered because there's an attachment to an old wound. And so it's about taking ownership and taming those ego triggers and to be in your emotional mastery on the spiritual path. And things that look like that is actually doing the inner work, seeing what triggers you, what causes an emotional trigger to come through. When we begin to understand our triggers and what our emotional reaction is, we can begin to have more self-awareness about that. Then we're able to have more emotional mastery, because we can respond to it instead of reacting when we are triggered. And so we need to start taking ownership of these emotions rather than bypassing it, because when you take ownership of your emotions, you begin to take ownership of your healing journey, your spiritual journey, and you begin to feel more whole and integrated with that, and you become more responsive, and you can see the ego for what it is. So when you do become integrated and take ownership, you become that emotional master. You're able to take control, if you want to call it that. But what we have to remember is not about we have to control our emotions to stop the emotions. It's about allowing the emotion to be there, but we don't react when our ego gets triggered. And a great example of this is road rage, when you maybe get cut off by another driver, or when you're in a long queue and you've got to be somewhere and you just want to react. You flip them off, you say, fuck you, you fucking piece of shit, do you know where the brakes are? Indicate. All of these things are you just getting triggered and you're reacting instead of responding, and you're going for the low-hanging fruit that's there, that enables you to just react. And it's when we have come into our emotional mastery, what happens is we ignore that low-hanging fruit. We say, okay, that was very annoying, but what can you actually do about it? Absolutely nothing. It's happened now. And it's about accepting situations, particularly when something does happen, if someone cuts you off or you are in a lot of traffic. So emotions on the spiritual journey is about working with the ego, working to tame your ego in so you respond instead of coming from anger, aggression. And so it's about taking ownership, taking up radical responsibility of your emotions, because when we are reacting, we are not taking ownership. But if somebody bypasses their emotions, they're not taking ownership. And this is just a disempowering, because they think that if they ignore the lower vibrational emotions that is attached to ego, then they won't feel anything that's negative. They won't manifest anything that's negative. And your ego will always be there. It's just about working with the ego. And so we have to come back down to the lower vibrational emotions and work with those in order so we can then integrate everything, so we can evolve spiritually and heal. And because often when we are triggered, that is just a wound that is coming up. It's a wound that we project onto somebody else. It's our shadow that is being reflected back to us when we are projecting, because when we project our emotions onto somebody else, this is reaction too, and this is just coming from a wounded inner child most often. And if you want to discover if you have an inner child wound, I have a free inner child wound quiz, and this quiz is just a helpful little quick quiz that will determine if you have an inner child wound and what your dominant wound may be. This is not a diagnosis of anything, it's just a simple, quick, fun quiz, and you'll be sent a free report about the wound and some steps you can begin to take to heal your wounds. So click the link in the pinned comment below and you'll be taken straight to that quiz. So spirituality doesn't mean you're not allowed to feel anything negative. It's about working with the ego and letting it take the back seat, and you can consciously drive the car. So then you're able to take ownership, come from a place that is more integrated, come from a place that is more responsive and not reactive, because you are letting the ego drive the seat. Because when your ego drives the seat, we let fear take the seat, we let our anger take the seat, we let our desires take the seat. And so this is about saying, I see you, ego. The ego's here, make some chatty stuff up in your head telling you, go and tell them to fuck off right now. But you can say to the ego, hold on a minute, I'm just gonna go on that. I hear you, I see you, okay. Will kind of always be there. There's nothing, I don't believe in this kind of whole ego death. The ego is a part of our human experience, and so when we do experience those negative emotions, it's just allowing the energy of that emotion to flow through us so then it can dissolve. And so this really means when we allow our wounds to be felt, our emotions to be felt rather than suppressed, energy to move, flow through us, so then we can begin to raise our frequency to higher states of consciousness. Because just think of it as a buoy on top of the water, like a fishing buoy, and it naturally floats on there, and then you're